he made a king. The king outgrew him, so Warwick tried to unmake him. Richard Neville did not inherit his power. He married into it. A 5-year-old girl died in 1449. The inheritance passed through his wife. The fortune he gained made a subject dangerous to kings. They called him the Kingmaker. He held castles, tenants, retainers, and Calais. By the 1450s, Warwick stood among the highest magnates in England. Then the king stopped answering. His newborn son was placed before him. He gave no word, no sign. For 18 months, the throne sat empty. A breathing king sat upon it. From 1455 to 1485, England came apart. Brothers signed away brothers. A 17-year-old prince lost the future of Lancaster in one afternoon. A king ended his days in the Tower. The official cause was grief. Few believed it. Warwick Castle still stands above the River Avon. Today, it sells tickets. He helped raise one king and restore another. Neither throne could save him. He died in a fog where his own army turned on itself. The story ahead runs through inheritance, betrayal, and a battlefield no one could see. If there is a forgotten European house or collapse you want brought into the light, leave it below. Stay with the channel and mark the video. This is where quiet history gets opened. The fortress that made the Kingmaker began as packed earth above a river, raised before England itself existed. Warwick Castle started as a defensive post in 914, when Thelfold, Lady of the Merchants, ordered a fortification built on a bend of the River Avon. William the Conqueror turned the site into a Norman castle in 1068. By the 15th century, its towers, hall, tenants, and retainers made it more than stone above a river. It was a machine of lordship. Whoever controlled Warwick did not merely own a residence. He commanded men. Then the Beauchamps ran out of heirs. The earldom still had a line, but that line was about to fail. Richard Beauchamp, the 13th Earl, served Henry V and died at Rouen in 1439 while serving as Lieutenant of France. His tomb in the Beauchamp Chapel at St. Mary's, Warwick, still survives. The chapel held his effigy. The earldom still had heirs, but the succession was fragile. His son Henry died in 1446 at 21. Henry's young daughter, the child countess, died at about 5 years old in 1449. Each death moved the inheritance closer to Anne Beauchamp and through Anne to her husband. 3 deaths in 13 years. One man was waiting at the end of the chain. Richard Neville was not born Earl of Warwick. He married into it. His wife carried the inheritance of a dying family line. The marriage itself likely took place around May 4th, 1436. Neville was 7. Anne was 9. This was not romance. It was a contractual merger between two of the most powerful families in England. The Nevilles already held vast estates across the north, anchored by their earldom of Salisbury. The Beauchamp inheritance brought the Midlands, the earldom of Warwick, and a network of tenants, manors, and political obligations that stretched across several counties. What a wedding chapel joined, an inheritance chain would spend the next 13 years delivering. The legal record did not understand what it was creating. By September 1449, an official inquisition confirmed Anne Beauchamp as the rightful heir, and Richard Neville stepped into the earldom. The record moved through medieval law with the calm precision of parchment that did not know it was building a kingmaker. By March 1450, Neville had secured recognition as the premier Earl of England. a rank that placed him at the top of the ceremonial and political hierarchy below the royal family. He was 21. He had not fought a battle. He had not led an army. Everything he held came through his wife's bloodline, through a sequence of deaths, legal decisions, and contested claims. He had already learned the central lesson of his life: kings ruled by law, but great lords ruled by men. The world had taught him that titles could move through marriages, power through documents, and retainers could turn private grievance into public policy. His danger was not that he wanted power. Every great lord wanted power. His danger was that the world had already rewarded him before he had proved himself. By the time the crown needed obedience, Warwick had already learned that obedience was something lesser men gave. That lesson mattered because Warwick did not rise slowly through service alone. He rose through a legal accident that looked, from the outside, like destiny. Men who had spent years earning offices now had to look up at a young earl whose authority had arrived through a child's death, a wife's inheritance, and a chain of parchment decisions. Warwick did not have to imagine that the system could be bent. His own life had already proved it. His income came from land, tenants, rents, offices, and military connections. He controlled men who answered to him before they answered to the crown. And under Henry VI, the crown lacked the strength to manage men whose power rested on estates and followings. The system was not broken by accident. It was built this way. What made Warwick dangerous was not his title, but the machine behind it. A great lord in 15th century England maintained an affinity, a network of lesser nobles, knights, lawyers, and armed men who wore his badge and followed his lead in politics and war. The lord provided patronage. The retainers provided loyalty and swords. When the crown was weak, it made men like Warwick more powerful than the government they were supposed to serve. His father, the Earl of Salisbury, controlled the northern Neville network. Between them, the family could call on men from Yorkshire to the Welsh Marches to Calais, where Warwick held the captaincy of the garrison. Calais was England's last military foothold on the continent, a walled town with a permanent garrison and a harbour. The man who held Calais held a royal garrison, a trade port, and leverage far beyond Warwickshire. By 1453, the 100 Years' War was over, and the Plantagenet crown had never looked weaker. Then, in August 1453, Henry VI stopped functioning. He could not speak. He could not respond. When his newborn son was brought before him, the king looked down and gave no answer. The final judge of every noble dispute had left the room without dying. The vacuum that opened would not close for 30 years. Richard, Duke of York, was appointed protector of the realm in 1454. Somerset was imprisoned. Warwick's family moved closer to the centre of royal government. Then, around Christmas 1454, Henry recovered. He restored Somerset, displaced York. Every arrangement made during the Protectorate was suddenly reversible. York and Warwick found themselves not merely out of favour, but potentially in danger. Somerset, back at the king's side, had every reason to punish the men who had imprisoned him. The king who had returned to consciousness was not a strong king restored. He was a weak king propped upright by the faction that happened to be standing closest. The war began not with banners, but in the streets of St. Albans. On May 22, 1455, Warwick's men broke into the town through gardens and back routes, bypassing barricades and turning a political standoff into a street fight. Somerset fell, reportedly near the Castle Inn. Northumberland and Lord Clifford fell in the same short burst of violence. Henry VI himself was struck by an arrow, a minor wound to the neck, and was found sheltering in a tanner's shop after the fighting stopped. The Yorkists knelt before him. They expressed loyalty. They had just removed his closest advisors by force and seized control of the government, and they did it all in the language of obedient subjects. The names of Somerset, Northumberland, and Clifford became political debts that the next battles would collect. At Warwick Castle, rents were collected and retainers were fed. The Great Hall received its lord when he returned from the road. The stones did not register what had changed, but a new understanding was taking hold. Negotiation had a limit. After that limit, there were swords. What followed was a cycle no ceremony could break. The Love Day of March 1458 saw rival lords walk arm in arm through London to hear a mass of reconciliation at St. Paul's Cathedral. Henry VI presided. Compensation was arranged for the families of the fallen. On paper, the books were being balanced, but the procession could not erase the fact that the men walking together still commanded followings. It bought time. It did not buy trust. Queen Margaret used the interval to build her position, gathering loyalists in the north and treating the Yorkist lords not as partners, but as dangers to be managed. She was defending her son's future, and she understood that the men responsible for Somerset's fall would not stop at one battle if power slipped from their hands again. By October 1459, the swords were out again. At Ludford Bridge, the Yorkist cause collapsed when a key Calais captain defected the night before battle. Warwick fled to Calais with his father Salisbury and young Edward, Earl of March. He turned exile into a staging ground. The garrison at Calais was loyal to Warwick personally. The town was fortified, well supplied, and positioned on the edge of the Burgundian sphere. Warwick could recruit, resupply, and communicate with Yorkist sympathizers in England without the Lancastrian court being able to stop him. The King Warwick helped make would soon do the one thing he could never forgive. In the summer of 1460, Warwick sailed back. Northampton fell in July. Then catastrophe. At Wakefield that December, York fell in battle. His son Edmund was lost in the aftermath, and Warwick's father Salisbury was captured and did not survive the day. 3 of the most important men in the Yorkist cause were gone. York's head was placed on a spike above Micklegate Bar, reportedly wearing a paper crown. But Edward of March won at Mortimer's Cross, marched into London, and was proclaimed Edward IV on March 4th, 1461. 3 weeks later, at Towton, Edward won the largest battle of the entire war in a snowstorm on Palm Sunday. Warwick had been essential to that sequence. But the young king standing in the snow at Towton was not a man who would remain anyone's instrument. Edward was 18. He wore the crown because Warwick had helped put it there. But he had also won it through the army he led on a frozen field in falling snow. Warwick's problem was not that Edward was weak. His problem was that Edward was strong without him. Edward wore the crown Warwick had helped win, and that crown no longer needed the Kingmaker's hand. The King Warwick chose a bride without telling the man who made him, and that single secret would unravel everything. Edward IV was supposed to be Warwick's success. He was young, victorious, and a Yorkist. He owed Warwick more than any king liked to owe a subject. But victory changed the balance between them. A defeated claimant needs a kingmaker. A crowned king starts looking for ways to stand alone. For Warwick, Edward was supposed to be the perfect result of everything he had built. Henry VI had been silent and surrounded by factions. Edward was young, visible, and victorious. He could stand in London as a king who looked like victory. Warwick had helped create exactly the monarch York needed. That was the danger. A king strong enough to win the crown was also strong enough to stop asking permission. Sometime in early May 1464, Edward married Elizabeth Woodville at Grafton Regis. He told no one. He did not consult Warwick, who at that moment was negotiating a French marriage alliance with Borna of Savoy, sister-in-law of King Louis Xi. When the truth emerged months later, it was not only a personal slight. It undid Warwick's diplomacy in public. Every promise he had made to the French court was now worthless. The man who had placed Edward on the throne discovered that the throne no longer needed his permission. Elizabeth was a widow, the mother of 2 sons from her first marriage to a Lancastrian knight who fell at the Second Battle of St. Albans. Her family had fought on the wrong side of the war Warwick had helped win. None of this mattered to Edward. He was 22, confident, and accustomed to getting what he wanted. He wanted Elizabeth Woodville. Warwick's name was still on every register. His influence was draining from all of them. Elizabeth did not arrive at court alone. She brought brothers, sisters, and a father who received the earldom of Rivers. Edward arranged marriages for several of them into the highest ranks of the nobility. One sister married the Duke of Buckingham's heir. Another married the heir of the Earl of Kent. Her brother John Woodville, barely 20, married the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, a woman in her 60s. The Woodvilles did not need to remove Warwick from office. They grew around him, filling the positions and patronage channels that had once flowed through the Neville network. Edward rewarded the family of the woman he loved. In doing so, he created a court faction that answered to the Queen's family line, not the Kingmaker's service. Edward was young, generous, and willing to reward the people closest to his queen. In a court of rivals, that generosity had consequences. At Warwick Castle, the Earl still held his estates, his garrison at Calais, and the ceremonial rank of Premier Earl. The court no longer revolved around Warwick. The Great Hall still hosted its lord. But the hall no longer sat at the centre of English politics. The door had not been closed. It had been moved. In the summer of 1469, Warwick stopped watching. He allied with Edward's brother George, Duke of Clarence, a young man with royal birth and a grievance. Clarence married Warwick's daughter Isabel Neville at Calais in July 1469, without Edward's approval, a deliberate echo of Edward's own secret wedding 5 years earlier. Then Warwick and Clarence issued a public manifesto listing grievances against the king's advisors, specifically the Woodvilles. The document framed the rebellion not as treason, but as reform. It was an old formula, used for centuries to justify noble revolt while preserving the fiction of loyalty to the crown. Warwick's settlement erased the Queen's father and brother from Edward's court. Warwick's forces defeated a royalist army at Edgecote Moor in late July. Edward IV was taken into custody. For a brief period, Warwick held the King of England as a political prisoner. On August 12, 1469, Warwick had the Queen's father, Richard Woodville, and her brother John Woodville put to death. no trial record survives. The Woodvilles were no longer protected by proximity to the king. But controlling a captive king proved harder than capturing one. Edward was eventually released and resumed his royal authority. Warwick could capture the king. He could strike at the king's family. He could not replace the king without a viable alternative. He did not yet have one. What Warwick did next would have been unthinkable 12 months earlier. By spring 1470, Warwick and Clarence had failed. They fled to France. There, in the court of Lewishey, Warwick reconciled with Margaret of Anjou at Angus in July 1470. Later accounts placed him on his knees before the woman whose husband he had helped depose, whose allies had fallen in the wars he helped lead, whose cause he had spent a decade destroying. Margaret, those accounts say, made him wait and accept humiliation before she agreed. The most powerful earl in England bent his knee because he had no other option. Edward IV could not be controlled. Clarence was unreliable. The only path back to power ran through the Lancastrian queen. The pact was sealed by the marriage of Warwick's daughter Anne to Margaret's son, Prince Edward. Anne was 14. Edward was 16. If the plan succeeded, Warwick's daughter would be Princess of Wales and eventually Queen. Lewishey provided ships, money, and French soldiers. In September 1470, Warwick returned to England with French backing. Edward V fled into exile, crossing to Burgundy with a small group of followers, leaving behind his kingdom and his pregnant wife, who took sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. Henry VI was retrieved from the Tower and placed back on the throne. Contemporaries described him as confused and poorly dressed, a man who had spent years in a cell being led through streets he no longer recognized. The re-adoption government was proclaimed. Parliament met. Warwick governed as the real power behind a king who could barely function as a symbol. Lewishey expected an Anglo-French alliance against Burgundy as payment for his support. Warwick could not deliver it. Margaret had not yet crossed with Prince Edward. Clarence was wavering. Edward IV was in Burgundy but not buried there. At Warwick Castle, the Neville household was restored to its former standing. The attainders were reversed. The estates flowed again. The Great Hall received its lord as it had before the exile. But the restoration was built on promises that were already failing. The Kingmaker had 6 months to hold a kingdom. He would not get 6 weeks. In March 1471, Edward IV crossed the sea with Burgundian support. He moved quickly, gathering men as he marched south. Clarence, who had sided with Warwick, switched back to his brother and publicly reconciled. The reversal gutted Warwick's political position. Clarence had been the bridge between the Neville network and the royal family. Without him, Warwick's coalition lost its connection to the Yorkist bloodline. London opened its gates. Henry VI fell back into Yorkist hands without a fight. Every alliance Warwick had built over the previous year dissolved before he could call his army together. By the time Warwick reached Barnet, he had changed sides, changed kings, changed sons-in-law, and changed the future he claimed to defend. He had spent 20 years proving that loyalty could be rearranged. Now he needed loyalty to hold still for one morning. That was the one thing his own career had taught men not to do. On the night of April 13th, 1471, Edward's army camped so close to Warwick's position near Barnet that when Warwick's artillery fired through the darkness, the shots passed over Edward's men entirely. The gunners could not see their target. Warwick had placed his artillery forward, expecting Edward to camp at a conventional distance. But Edward pushed his men closer than any commander normally would. The bombardment sailed overhead, crashing into empty ground. Edward's soldiers lay in the wet grass, no fires, no trumpets. The fog thickened. Warwick had spent his career reading men, who could be bought, who could be frightened, who could be turned. The fog was not a man. It could not be negotiated. It could not be bribed. It did not care which badge a man wore. By dawn, the mist had swallowed the field entirely. Barnet was not defeated. It was a collapse built from the inside. On April 14, the two armies met in a mist so heavy that men could barely see the banners beside them. The lines were misaligned. Oxford's troops, fighting for Warwick, swung wide on the flank and crashed into their own allies. Oxford's badge, a star with streams, looked like Edward's sunburst in the grey light. Men screamed treason. The word moved faster than orders could stop it. In an army built from men who had been political enemies 6 months earlier, the accusation of treason did not need evidence. It only needed a voice. Warwick's army fractured along the seams you would expect. Warwick and his brother Montague fell. Edward ordered their bodies displayed at St. Paul's Cathedral, faces uncovered, for 2 days. The Kingmaker died not from one clean betrayal, but from the accumulated confusion of a war he had spent 20 years feeding. The Lancastrian Queen landed in England the same day the Kingmaker died. Margaret of Anjou and Prince Edward arrived too late and too committed to turn back. Edward IV Force marched his army from London and caught them near Tewkesbury. On May 4, the Lancastrian army broke. Prince Edward fell. He was 17. The direct male line of Lancaster ended in a field beside an abbey. For some who sought sanctuary inside, refuge ended at the abbey doors. Margaret of Anjou was captured in the days that followed. Between May 21 and 23, 1471, Henry VI died in the Tower of London. The Yorkist account said grief. The chronicler Warwick wrote that Henry was put to death between the hours of 11 and 12 at night. His body was displayed publicly, face uncovered. Medieval belief held that a slain man's remains would reveal the presence of the one responsible. Whether medical fact or political rumour, Warwick reported the sign plainly. The people watched. Within 6 weeks of Barnet, every king the Kingmaker ever made or restored was beyond his reach. The woman whose inheritance created the Kingmaker's power survived him by 21 years. She did not survive what he built. Anne Beauchamp, the Countess of Warwick, was alive in 1474. She was in England. She was not consulted. That year, Parliament passed an act treating her as if she were legally dead, so that the vast Warwick inheritance could be divided between her two sons-in-law, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester. The fortune that made Warwick feared had passed through her name and bloodline. When the men came to divide it, she became an obstacle to be written around. The act was not an accident of legal language. It was a deliberate mechanism. Clarence had married Isabel Neville, Warwick's elder daughter. Gloucester had married Anne Neville, the younger. Both men wanted the Warwick inheritance, and neither wanted it filtered through a living mother-in-law who might contest the division. The simplest solution was to erase her legal existence. Parliament obliged. The Act allowed the two dukes to inherit as though Anne Beauchamp had already died, dividing the estates without her consent, her signature, or her presence. The cruelest part was not only that she lost land, it was that the men who divided it needed her alive enough to have inherited it, but powerless enough to be ignored. Her bloodline made Warwick. Warwick's fall made her inconvenient. The law solved the inconvenience by pretending she was already gone. Clarence and Gloucester disputed the Warwick inheritance so sharply that Edward IV had to intervene between his own brothers. The inheritance that had funded armies and shaped English politics for 2 decades was now a domestic argument between in-laws. In that moment, the whole story folded back on itself. Warwick's power had begun because Anne Beauchamp existed in law. His estate, rank and influence all depended on her place in the inheritance chain. After his death, the same legal world that had raised him found it easier to pretend she no longer existed. The machine had used her twice, first to create the Kingmaker, then to erase what remained of him. The woman whose inheritance helped arm the Kingmaker died without a recorded burial place. Anne Beauchamp spent the years after 1474 in obscurity. She lived her final years on a modest income, a pensioner of the crown that had once depended on her family's wealth. Under Richard III, her son-in-law, she received some support but no legal restoration. After Bosworth, she petitioned Henry VII's Parliament for the reversal of the Act. Parliament agreed, but the restoration came with conditions. She was required to surrender her claims before receiving any lands in return. What she received was a fraction of what had been taken. In 1492, Spain took Granada and Columbus crossed the Atlantic. That same year, Anne Beauchamp died. The inheritance that made the Kingmaker passed through her. History forgot to keep her name. Edward V's victory should have ended the cycle. It did not. Clarence, rewarded with half the Warwick inheritance after betraying Warwick, could not stop conspiring. He challenged the legitimacy of Edward's marriage. He accused the Queen's family of witchcraft. He maintained a household that looked uncomfortably like a rival court. Edward tolerated the danger for years, then ended it in 1478. Later tradition claimed Clarence was drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. Whether the detail is literal or symbolic, the message was the same. Even a royal brother was not safe from the machine. Edward himself died on April 9, 1483. He was 40. His heir, Edward V, was 12 and at Ludlow with his Woodville guardians when the news came. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, intercepted the boy on the road to London. The Woodville escorts were arrested. Edward V was placed in the Tower, ostensibly to prepare for his coronation. His younger brother Richard joined him there in June. The coronation never happened. In late June, a preacher declared Edward III's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville invalid, making both princes illegitimate. Richard of Gloucester was proclaimed Richard III on July 6, 1483. The boys remained in the Tower. They were seen less and less frequently. Then they were not seen at all. In 1674, workmen at the Tower found 2 small skeletons beneath a staircase. Charles II ordered them reburied at Westminster Abbey in an urn designed by Christopher Wren. Attempts to re-examine the bones have been denied. The skeletons have never been subjected to modern DNA analysis. The princes remain missing in the only way that matters. Their disappearance is documented. Their death is assumed. Their killer is not proven. The Tower held the answer, and the Tower kept it. The last Plantagenet king ruled for 2 years and died trying to end the war with a single charge. Richard III wore the crown for 2 years. On August 22, 1485, he rode into battle at Bosworth Field against Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian claimant who had crossed the Channel with roughly 2,000 French mercenaries. Henry Tudor had sailed from France on August 1. His claim to the throne was thin and contested, running through the Beaufort line. What he had was not a strong legal claim. What he had was French support, Welsh connections, and a promise to marry Elizabeth of York. Richard had the larger force. He had the crown. He had the loyalty, or so he believed, of the Stanley family. Richard held Stanley's son hostage to guarantee the family's loyalty. It was not enough. The Stanleys positioned their forces to the side. Uncommitted, Richard saw Henry's position and charged directly at him. The charge cut through Henry's bodyguard. Richard came close enough that accounts describe him striking Henry's standard-bearer. Then Sir William Stanley's men struck Richard's flank. The charge collapsed. Richard fell fighting, the last English king to die in battle. His body was stripped. It was carried to Leicester on the back of a horse and displayed publicly for 2 days so that no one could claim the king had survived. His crown, according to tradition, was found in a thorn bush. Henry Tudor became Henry VII, not because England had healed, but because enough of the old war machine had burned itself out. The Wars of the Roses did not end with a treaty or a negotiation. They ended because the last man willing to fight for the Plantagenet crown was in the mud. The king who fell at Bosworth would not be found for 500 years. Richard III had been buried at a Franciscan friary in Leicester. The friary was dissolved in the 1530s and built over. By the 20th century, the grave had been lost. In 2012, the University of Leicester found his skeleton beneath a car park. The spine showed severe scoliosis. The skull bore 2 wounds, either one fatal. In 2014, Nature Communications confirmed the identification through mitochondrial DNA. Richard was reinterred at Leicester Cathedral in March 2015. Warwick Castle still stands above the River Avon, but the names that made it feared are gone. The mound, towers, dungeon and hall remain, because stone keeps its shape better than power does. Today the castle is operated by Merlin Entertainments, the fortress that once housed one of the most powerful political operators in England now packages the violence of his century as a family afternoon. The dungeon that had confined political prisoners now confines actors in costume. A trebuchet in the grounds fires demonstration shots over the river while families watch from the lawn. The castle that was built to hold a conquered region now holds tourists. After Warwick's death, the castle passed through the hands of the men who divided his inheritance. It served the crown under the Tudors and fell into neglect before James I granted it to Fulke Greville in 1604. Greville began restoring the castle, converting it from a medieval fortress into an aristocratic residence. He did not finish. On September 1, 1628, his own servant stabbed him. He died weeks later. Even in peacetime, the castle collected violent ends. During the English Civil War, the castle was besieged again. The walls absorbed cannon fire as they had absorbed arrows 2 centuries earlier. In 1978, the castle opened to the public. In 2007, a sale and leaseback transaction involving Merlin Entertainments and Pressbury moved the property into a lease structure while Merlin continued operations. The Barnet battlefield is a registered site with open ground, footpaths and a memorial. Tewkesbury Abbey still stands beside the meadow. The Tower of London still holds the chapel, where lilies and roses are laid each May for a king who died there in the dark. Bosworth has a heritage centre and a walking trail. The stone survived because it never had to choose a king, and the men who did are gone. The River Avon still passes beneath the walls. It does not slow down. It passed beneath these walls before Warwick was born and after his body was displayed. 9 centuries of ambition, war, betrayal and silence have happened above its surface, and the water has carried none of it. Warwick Castle sells the version of history that fits inside an afternoon. The dungeon that once held men who would never walk out now holds a queue. The walls that absorbed cannon fire now absorb the sound of guided tours. Few visitors passing through have heard the name Anne Beauchamp. Few know that a woman was declared legally dead by Parliament while she was still breathing, so that the men who married her daughters could carve up the fortune her bloodline had built. The inheritance that made the Kingmaker passed through her. History forgot to keep her name. At Barnet, a memorial stands where the fog once blinded 2 armies. There is no sign marking where Warwick fell, because no one recorded the exact spot. The most powerful earl in England died somewhere in that field, and the field does not say where. Tewkesbury Abbey still stands beside the meadow whose name still carries the memory of what happened there. A 17-year-old prince died within sight of those walls. His mother outlived him by 11 years and never fought again. The Kingmaker's towers still rise above the Avon. His great hall still holds its shape. The stone has outlived every name that was ever carved into the story of this place. Warwick turned marriage into fortune, fortune into armed power, and armed power into a claim over kings. But at Barnet, the machine he built could no longer tell itself apart. The fog came down. His men turned inward. He died in a fog where his own army turned on itself.